I never saw the signs. It's funny how hindsight works like that. You spot every single red flag when you're already standing in the wreckage. But when you're in the middle of it, you're blind. You think you've got it all figured out. We'd been married 10 years. Together for 15. I was 39 when everything finally crumbled, and my wife, Natalie, was 37. We met in college at a barbecue, not the wild kind, more like those organized ones for upperclassmen trying to network or whatever. I was quiet, working my way through a mechanical engineering degree, and she was loud in a way that lit up a room. She was a business major, all ambition and confidence. That night, she asked me to dance. I almost said no. I was always the guy standing on the sidelines, and she was the girl everyone noticed. But she pulled me in. That was Natalie. I guess in a way, she always pulled me in. We dated all through college, and I proposed to her the week after graduation. We got married in a small chapel outside Charleston, surrounded by oak trees and Spanish moss. It felt like something out of a movie. Her vows wrecked me. She said I made her feel safe. That no one had ever seen her like I did. God, what a lie that turned out to be. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Before everything went to hell, we built a quiet life in Charlotte, North Carolina. I worked for an aerospace firm, designing components for military aircraft, and Natalie started her own event planning business. We didn't have kids. Not for lack of trying. 3 years in, we started the fertility journey, but it took its toll. Physically. Emotionally. Financially. After a series of failed rounds and a miscarriage that nearly broke her, we decided to stop trying. We told everyone it was a mutual decision. That we were content being just us. But it was never really mutual. I saw it in her eyes sometimes. She would smile when she talked to friends about their kids, but when no one was watching, that smile faded. That pain stayed. We poured our love into other things. She took up photography. I started restoring an old 1966 Mustang in the garage. We'd take long drives on weekends. Cook dinner together every night. Every Friday, without fail, we'd open a bottle of red wine and talk about the week. It became our ritual: candles, jazz in the background, the clink of glasses and soft laughter. That's what makes this all so much harder. We were good, or at least I thought we were. Until it all came undone. It started with something small. One night, I walked into the kitchen and saw her jump, like she was startled. Her phone slipped from her hand. She scrambled to catch it. I joked, "What, are you texting your secret lover?" She laughed a little too hard, a little too long. It was nothing, I told myself. We all keep things on our phones. I wasn't exactly proud of my Reddit browsing history either. Still, that laugh stuck with me. Then the texts started happening later at night. Her phone never left her side. And when it buzzed, she'd glance at me first before flipping it over screen down. Again, I didn't want to be that guy. I trusted her. She had never once given me a reason not to. In 15 years, Natalie had never so much as flirted with another man, as far as I could tell. But one Sunday morning, something happened that I couldn't unsee. She was in the shower. I was doing laundry, sorting through the clothes on the floor. Her phone lit up with a message: "Last night was everything." The contact name was saved as M. I froze. Everything in my body tensed up, like I'd been struck by lightning. I stared at that glowing screen, willing myself not to open it. But then it lit up again. "Can't stop thinking about you." I picked it up. My heart was beating out of my chest. I didn't even need to unlock it to see the first few words of the third text. "When can we do it again?" My ears were ringing. I put the phone down just as I heard the water shut off. I grabbed a handful of laundry and pretended like I was just doing what I said I'd be doing. She walked in wearing a towel, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "You're sweet for doing that." Then she breezed past me like nothing was wrong. I should have confronted her right then. Asked who M was. But I didn't. I went numb. Over the next week, I watched her closely. Every interaction. Every time she picked up her phone, every time she claimed to be heading to a client meeting. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake beside her and wonder what else I didn't know. That Friday, we had our usual wine night. She opened a bottle of Malbec and played Coltrane on vinyl, just like always. She acted normal. Asked me about work. Laughed at my story about my new junior engineer mixing up blueprints. But her eyes were elsewhere. I watched her mouth form words. Watched her sip her wine and smile. But all I could hear was that message, last night was everything. I couldn't keep pretending. "Hey," I said quietly, somewhere between the cheese board and the second glass of wine. "Can I ask you something?" She paused. Her fork stopped mid-air. "Sure." "Who's M?" Her face didn't change at first. But then I saw it, the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Her hand lowered slowly. She didn't say anything. So I said it for her. "Is he someone from work? Someone new?" She stared at me. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I saw the texts." There it was. The moment the truth surfaced. She didn't gasp. Didn't cry. She just sat back, staring at me, and said softly, "I didn't want you to find out like this." Like this? What the hell did that mean? I don't remember much else about that night. Just her voice breaking as she confessed that yes, there was someone. Yes, it had been going on for almost 5 months. Yes, she cared about him. But she never told me who. Not that night. That bomb dropped later, in a way I never could have prepared for. And when I found out who he really was, everything I thought I knew about my life collapsed. She didn't tell me who he was that night. I think she thought she was protecting me, or maybe protecting herself. Either way, the only thing I got was that it was complicated, and that he meant something, but she still loved me and didn't want to hurt me. Didn't want to hurt me. God. I think that line still burns worse than anything else. The irony of it. The absurdity. How do you spend months lying to someone, sneaking around, and still have the gall to say you didn't want to hurt them? I didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. She stayed on the couch. I lay in bed with my arms folded across my chest, staring at the ceiling fan like it was a clock ticking towards some kind of judgment day. My mind raced through the last few months, cataloging every odd detail I'd dismissed, the missed calls, the last-minute dinner cancellations, the new lingerie she bought for herself. The weekends she claimed she needed space to regroup. Every single one a breadcrumb. Every one a sign. And I ignored them all. By Saturday morning, the numbness had begun to wear off, replaced with something darker, sharper. Rage? Not quite. More like betrayal laced with humiliation. I couldn't stop picturing her with him. Wondering if she smiled at him the way she used to smile at me. If she laughed at his stupid jokes. If she whispered the same "I love yous" with the same softness I used to hold sacred. I stayed silent through the morning. She kept her distance, hovering around the kitchen like a ghost, making coffee she didn't drink. She tried to talk to me twice, both times ended with her choking on her own words and backing off. I didn't speak until early afternoon. "I want to know who he is." She looked up from the couch. Her eyes were rimmed red. Her hair still looked perfect. It always did. "I told you, it doesn't." "It matters," I snapped. "Don't tell me it doesn't." Her face fell. It's not someone you know that well. I narrowed my eyes. But I do know him. She hesitated. Is it someone I've met? I pushed. Still no answer. Just the sound of the refrigerator humming behind us. A clock ticking too loudly in the hallway. Tell me who he is, Natalie. Her lips parted, then closed. She looked down at her hands in her lap. Then, finally. It's Ryan. At first, the name didn't register. It hovered in the air like smoke. Ryan. I repeated. Then it hit me like a sledgehammer. Ryan Callahan. My brother's best friend since childhood. The guy who used to sleep over at our house in high school. The guy I played basketball with on weekends. The guy who gave a toast at our wedding, for Christ's sake. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. He'd moved back to town after a messy divorce. I remember my brother telling me Ryan was going through it. Said he needed a place to crash, a fresh start, maybe a new job. I didn't think anything of it. But Natalie, she had seen him. At our anniversary party last year. And apparently after that. Again. And again. My knees buckled. I actually staggered back and sat down hard on the dining room chair. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice hollow. She didn't speak. You slept with Ryan? I repeated, louder. Ryan? I didn't plan it. Don't give me that, I snapped. Don't you dare insult my intelligence like that. You saw him, and what? Sparks just flew and oops, you tripped and fell into his bed? She flinched like I'd slapped her. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to get out. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door without another word. I drove for hours that day. Didn't have a destination in mind. I just let the road carry me. Through downtown Charlotte. Out to the edge of the city. Past the old gas station where I used to fill up before dates with her. Past the tree-lined streets we used to walk together. I ended up at my brother's house. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted him to tell me this wasn't real. That I'd misunderstood. That my wife hadn't been screwing his best friend behind my back. He opened the door, eyes bloodshot, like he'd been crying. Oh God, I said quietly. You knew. He didn't deny it. Not at first, he whispered. But yeah. I found out a few weeks ago. My knees went weak again. I had to sit down on the porch steps. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, not looking at him. Because I wasn't sure how. Because I was stupid. Because I kept hoping she'd come clean. I laughed bitterly. Yeah. She waited until I forced her. My brother sat beside me. The air between us thick and miserable. I told Ryan to end it, he said quietly. Told him he was a coward and a piece of shit. We're done. I blocked him last week. That makes two of us, I said. We sat there for a long time. Just two men broken by the same person. My brother offered me a drink, but I declined. I couldn't feel anything but that cold, hollow ache that sat in my chest like a brick. When I finally drove home that night, she was still there. Sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the wedding album like it was some ancient relic from another life. She looked up when I walked in. Her face was streaked with tears, her mascara smeared. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't respond. I never meant for it to happen. I don't even know how it started. I set my keys on the counter, quietly. It started when you lied to me. And it ended today. I still love you, she said, her voice trembling. I looked her dead in the eye. No, I said. You love the idea of me. But you don't destroy someone you love. I walked past her and into the bedroom, shut the door, and started packing a bag. It was the beginning of the end. I didn't sleep that night either. The bag sat half-zipped at the edge of the bed for hours, taunting me. I couldn't decide whether I was leaving or if she should. Neither of us said a word. I just lay there on top of the covers in jeans and a flannel shirt, shoes still on, staring at the ceiling until sunrise. At one point, around 3 a.m., I heard her crying on the other side of the door. Soft, muffled sobs. I didn't get up. I didn't open the door. I just closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me, part rage, part pity, mostly just heartbreak. It wasn't the kind of cry you hear when someone is caught. It was the kind you make when you've destroyed something you can't ever fix. When the sun came up, I stood, zipped the bag, and walked out of the room. She was asleep on the couch, curled up like a child. One arm dangled over the side, and her hair spilled out across the cushion like nothing had happened. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. I moved into a long-stay hotel a few blocks from my office. Not the sketchy kind either, it had a kitchenette, clean linens, and a staff that minded their business. I told them I was transitioning homes after a flood. That lie came easier than I'd expected. I didn't go to work that day, or the next. I turned my phone off for 72 hours. Didn't respond to texts, didn't check emails. My manager left a voicemail saying, "Take what you need, man." Seriously. I appreciated that more than he'll ever know. By the third day, I turned the phone back on and found a flood of missed calls and messages, most from Natalie, a few from mutual friends, one from my brother simply saying, "I'm here if you need me." No questions. No pressure. I called him back first. We met at a bar neither of us had been to before. I think we needed the anonymity, a place where no one knew what was going on. Where no one would recognize our shame. We didn't talk about her right away. We talked about football. About his kid's upcoming birthday party. About the way the world felt like it was shifting under our feet, both of us floating through a life we didn't recognize. Eventually, after the second beer, I asked him a question I hadn't dared ask yet. "Do you think she loved him?" He didn't answer right away. "I think," he said slowly, "that she wanted to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time." And he gave her that. For a while. But it wasn't real. "No," he said. "I don't think it ever was." I went back to the house on a Sunday. She wasn't there, she'd gone to stay with her sister, apparently, after I left. That was fine by me. I wasn't ready to see her. I needed to walk through the house without the weight of her presence, needed to feel it for what it had become. A graveyard. The silence hit different now. Every room felt heavier. The kitchen still smelled like rosemary, probably the last thing she cooked before the truth spilled out. Our bedroom was exactly how I left it. The closet doors open. My side bare. Her side untouched. I opened the nightstand and found her wedding ring inside. She'd taken it off. That hurt in a way I didn't expect. Not because I wanted her to keep wearing it, but because of what it meant. She'd let go before she ever confessed. That ring used to be everything, a symbol of a promise we swore we'd never break. And now it sat in a drawer like a trinket from a dead life. I stayed at the house for a couple hours. Packed up more clothes. Grabbed some photo albums, a few books, my tools from the garage. Left the wedding pictures where they were. I couldn't bear to look at them, but I didn't have the heart to throw them away. Not yet. When I walked out the front door, I saw her car pulling into the driveway. My pulse spiked. I almost ducked back inside, but she saw me. Too late. She got out slowly. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Jeans and a hoodie that used to be mine. She looked normal. Like she could have been anyone. And I think that's what stung the most. She didn't look like the woman I used to dream about. She looked like a stranger who happened to live in my house. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't say no. But I didn't say yes either. We sat on the front steps, a few feet apart, just like teenagers who'd snuck out after curfew. "I know you hate me," she began. I stayed silent. "I don't have an excuse. I could tell you I was lonely. That I missed feeling wanted. That I didn't think it would go that far. But none of that matters now. What I did. I broke us." She paused. "I've been trying to figure out when it started," she whispered. "Not the cheating. The unraveling. When I stopped telling you the truth. When I stopped feeling like your wife. That cut deep. You could have talked to me," I said, voice low. "You could have said anything. But you didn't. You chose him." She nodded. "I know." I stared at the mailbox across the street. The numbers were faded. I'd meant to repaint them last summer. "Do you love him?" I asked. "No," she said immediately. "I thought I did. But no. He was something else. An escape." I looked at her then. For real. The eyes I used to adore. The freckles I used to trace with my fingers. They were all still there. But they meant something different now. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you," I said. "I'm not asking you to," she replied. "I just wanted you to know the truth. And that if I could take it back, I would." I stood up. "I need time," I said. "And space. We'll figure out the logistics later." "Okay," she whispered, standing too. "I'll stay with my sister." As I walked toward my car, she called out one last thing. "Thank you for coming back." I didn't look at her when I answered. I didn't come back. I came to let go. The thing they never tell you about heartbreak is how quiet the world becomes afterward. No explosions. No dramatic music. Just this low hum, like static on an old radio you can't quite tune. Everything is technically still functioning, but nothing really sounds the same. I tried to return to normal life after that. Woke up. Made coffee. Went to work. Smiled at the guy from accounting when we passed in the hallway. Took client calls. Nodded through meetings. I became a master at the nod, that subtle upward tilt of the chin that says, "I'm fine," when everything inside you is still ash. My coworkers didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. I think they could tell. The loose tie. The glassy eyes. The wedding band gone from my finger. They just let me be. My brother checked in every other day. Sometimes we talked about Ryan. Sometimes we didn't. He was angry too, not just for me, but for himself. "That guy was my best friend," he'd mutter. "He used to be at our house more than his own. He played video games in our basement, raided our fridge, crashed on our couch, and he repays that by sleeping with my brother's wife?" I didn't have a reply. Some things don't have language. But life trudged forward. Days passed. Then weeks. I started sleeping a little more. Ate something that wasn't takeout. I even laughed at a dumb meme someone sent me, that felt like a victory. Small, but real. It wasn't healing, exactly. More like surviving. Then one night, about 3 weeks after I left the house, something happened that shoved the knife in all over again. I was in the hotel room, half watching The Martian on cable, just trying to fall asleep. I'd left my phone charging across the room on purpose. I didn't want to be tempted to scroll through old photos, old texts, old ghosts. But the damn thing buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. By the third time, I got up, more annoyed than curious. I figured it was another spam call or maybe a late-night message from a friend checking in. Instead, I saw this. Natalie. I can't stop thinking about your hands. About last time. When you held me against the washer and made me forget everything. I froze. My stomach dropped. The message was vivid. Intimate. Loaded with unspoken context. And it had clearly not been meant for me. A few seconds later, another text came through. Natalie. Wait. I'm so sorry. That wasn't meant for you. I just stared at it. That sentence, that wasn't meant for you, it's strange how much damage it can do. How in 7 words, you can be dragged right back to square one. I sat on the bed, staring at the screen like it might explain itself. She was still talking to him. After everything. After sitting on the porch and crying and saying it was over. After swearing she didn't love him. Still. Him. I stood up and paced the room. My heart was beating too fast, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was laugh, this bitter, guttural sound that sounded more like choking. I had been grieving her. And she was still feeding the fire with him. What did I expect? That betrayal came with a deadline? That after she cried once, she was done? No. She was still in it. And I was still the fool. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She followed up the next morning with a string of apologies, trying to backpedal, spinning a web of excuses. It was a mistake, it was old, it was a draft I accidentally sent, and my personal favorite. It didn't mean anything. I didn't reply to any of it. Instead, I forwarded the messages to my lawyer. I hadn't filed yet, some part of me had still been clinging to the idea of space, of processing. Of maybe, figuring out what life looked like after a betrayal this big. But that text. That was clarity. Not pain. Not confusion. Just clarity. Natalie wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for getting caught. I met with my lawyer that Friday. He was efficient. Professional. Asked if I wanted to pursue fault-based filing or amicable dissolution. I said fault. I handed him my phone and showed him everything. He didn't flinch. Just nodded, took notes, asked if I wanted to pursue alimony or keep it clean. Keep it clean, I said. I don't want her money. I don't want anything from her. He raised an eyebrow. Most men would push for restitution. I'm not most men, I replied. I just want my life back. When Natalie got served, she called. I didn't answer. She texted. I deleted it. She emailed, some long-winded, desperate thing that started with, I never meant for this to happen, and ended with, can't we at least talk? No, Natalie. We talked. You made your choices. Now you get to live in them. And me? I started over. Not in the new haircut, new girl, new car way. No, that comes later, if at all. I started over by driving back to the house, packing up what was mine, and hiring a moving company to haul it all into a small 2-bedroom rental on the other side of town. Quiet neighborhood. Big trees. A little porch I could sit on in the evenings. I started reading again. Books I hadn't touched in years. I picked up my guitar. I called my parents more. I grieved, yes. But slowly, it began to fade. The weight didn't leave, it just settled somewhere deeper. Somewhere manageable. And one morning, a few months later, I caught myself smiling in the mirror. Not because I'd healed completely. But because I knew I could. I didn't hear from her for a while after that. Natalie must have realized that nothing she could say would change my mind. The text stopped. The calls, the emails, even the voicemails, all went silent. And for the first time since I walked in that kitchen and asked, "Who's M?" I felt peace. Real peace. I could breathe again. Mornings became lighter. I didn't wake up with a lump in my throat. I didn't dread the silence. I started to like it, even. It was mine now. I didn't tell many people what happened. Not the full story. Just that we were separating. It got complicated, I'd say. And most people nodded in that sympathetic way, like they understood. A few tried to push for details, I dodged those. I didn't need pity, and I didn't need validation. I knew what happened. That was enough. My brother knew everything, of course. He was the only one I let into the wreckage. Still blocked Ryan? I asked him one night over wings and beer. He nodded. Yeah. He tried calling once. Left a message like nothing happened. "Hey man, wanted to catch up." He scoffed. "Can you believe that?" "Some people don't know how to feel shame," I said. "Or maybe they do. They just don't care." 2.5 months after I filed, I got a package. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I knew too well. It was a small cardboard box, sealed with tape, and something about it just felt heavy. Not physically. Emotionally. I opened it at the kitchen counter with a steak knife. Inside was a thick, folded letter on top of what looked like an old shoebox filled with photos, trinkets, and, oddly, a single Polaroid. I picked up the letter first. I won't lie, my hands were shaking. I didn't know what I was about to read. "Dear Caleb. This will be the last thing you ever receive from me. I promise. I'm not writing this to win you back. That ship sailed the night I sent that message to the wrong phone. I know that. I've been doing a lot of therapy. A lot of digging into my past and trying to figure out why I did what I did. You don't owe me anything, but I owe you the truth. I was lonely. Not because you weren't good to me. You were. God, you were the most loyal man I've ever known. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being honest with myself, about the grief of losing a child we never had, about the resentment I buried instead of facing it with you. I let Ryan represent something I thought I needed: chaos, attention, escape. I told myself lies so I could survive the numbness I felt. But it was never about love. I don't think I even liked him. He was just there. You were always there too. But I stopped choosing you. And for that, I will always carry shame. In the box, you'll find pieces of us. Things I took for granted. Things you might want to burn. But I needed to give them back. You deserve to decide what to do with the memories. I am letting you go, fully. I hope you find someone who chooses you every day, even when life is quiet. Even when it's hard. I didn't know how to be that woman. I hope someday, I can be her for myself. Goodbye, Caleb. Natalie. I stood there, staring at the letter for a long time. Not crying. Not angry. Just, absorbing it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. That mattered. She wasn't trying to make me feel sorry for her. She was just finally being honest. Inside the box were ticket stubs from concerts we went to in our 20s. A photo strip from a beach boardwalk arcade. A necklace I gave her for our 3rd anniversary. The Polaroid was of me, asleep on the couch, clutching a book I'd fallen asleep reading. She must have taken it quietly, sometime in the early years. My face was peaceful. She'd written something on the bottom in faded pen: "You're the only place I ever felt safe." That one stung. Because it was true. I didn't reach out. I didn't reply. I tucked the letter into a drawer in my nightstand, not out of sentiment, just because it didn't feel right to throw it away. I burned the photo. Not in rage. Just closure. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called a woman named Lila. Lila was a barista at this coffee place I'd been frequenting the past couple of months. Not the kind of place with tip jars shaped like puns or indie music blaring from Bluetooth speakers. It was quiet. Old wood floors. Good espresso. Regulars who left each other alone. We'd spoken a few times. Just small talk. She had this warm laugh, like she'd been through some things but still chose to laugh anyway. One day, I noticed a tattoo on her wrist, an anchor wrapped in roses. Old Navy? I asked her once, nodding to the ink. Ha. Clothes, she said. It's for my brother. He was a sailor. Lost him 5 years ago. I nodded and didn't press. She seemed surprised I didn't offer platitudes. You just gonna leave it at that? She teased. Not everything needs to be explained, I said. Apparently, she liked that. We kept talking. Eventually, I learned she was divorced too. Her ex had walked out on her when her brother died. Couldn't handle the grief. Said she was too much sadness to be around. She'd shrugged when she told me that. But her voice had cracked just slightly. So when I called her that night, I didn't ask for a date. I just said, "Want to grab a drink with someone who's learning how to breathe again?" There was a pause. Then her voice, soft and sure. "Yeah. I'd like that." It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something honest. Something steady. And after everything I'd been through, that was enough to hope again. Lila wasn't like Natalie. She didn't dominate a room. She didn't speak in grand, sweeping declarations or spin plans like a spider web you couldn't see until you were tangled up in it. Lila was grounded. Quiet in a confident way. The first night we met outside the coffee shop, it was just dinner at a small Italian place a few blocks from my new place. The kind of restaurant with candles in wine bottles and soft Sinatra playing over the speakers. The kind of place Natalie would have found quaint but a little underwhelming. Lila, though, just smiled at the ambience like it was a warm blanket. "I used to come here after night shifts," she said, swirling her wine. "They knew me well enough to sneak me breadsticks before the kitchen opened." We talked for hours. About nothing, mostly. About her garden. About my Mustang that still sat half-finished in storage. About how sometimes the hardest part of rebuilding wasn't the work, it was accepting that the old structure was gone. At one point, she asked, "Was it recent?" I knew what she meant. I took a breath. 3 months since I moved out. 5 months since I found out. She didn't flinch. Didn't pity me. She just nodded. Cheating? I nodded once. "Do you still love her?" That one hit. "I think I love the person I thought she was," I said. "That's fair," she said. "That version's the hardest to let go." She didn't ask for details. Didn't push. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could exhale without watching someone analyze the breath. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more. Nothing rushed. No labels. Just dinners. Walks. Long phone calls where silence didn't feel awkward. She never pressured. I never performed. It was a weird, beautiful freedom, not having to play the part of the husband anymore. One Saturday, we drove out to a flea market an hour outside town. I don't know why. It just sounded like something normal people did. She tried on a hat from the 1940s and made this terrible British accent impression that had me laughing harder than I had in years. "You're not funny," I told her, wiping my eyes. "Then why are you smiling?" she grinned. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm not going to question it." One night, about 6 weeks after our first drink, she stayed over. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't even a kiss until we were on the couch watching a documentary about black bears of all things. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I turned toward her. Our eyes met. That was it. The kiss wasn't fireworks. It wasn't electric. It was safe. Steady. Like two people finding each other in the same quiet storm. When we moved to the bedroom later, I was nervous. I hadn't been with anyone but Natalie in almost a decade. But Lila, she was patient. She didn't rush me. And when we finally fell asleep, it wasn't tangled limbs and whispered promises. It was just her head on my chest, her breath even, her hand resting lightly on my ribs like she was making sure I was real. And for once, I didn't feel like a broken man pretending to be whole. But peace never stays untouched, does it? 3 days later, I got a phone call. Unknown number. No voicemail. I ignored it. Then came the text. I know we agreed this was final. But I have to see you. It's important. Please. Natalie. I sat with that text for a full hour before I responded. Why? She replied in seconds. It's not about us. I swear. It's about something I found. I wouldn't reach out unless it mattered. I stared at the screen. I didn't owe her anything. But some part of me, some stupid, unfinished part, still believed that closure was a one-time event. That maybe, just maybe, I needed this last thing. I told Lila I had to meet someone from my past. She didn't ask who. Just said, take your time. I appreciated that more than I could say. We met at a park. Public space. Open air. Middle ground. She looked different. Tired. Pale. Her hair was shorter. The kind of haircut women get after something ends. She handed me a manila envelope the second we sat down. What's this? I asked. Emails, she said. From Ryan. After the texts. After you filed. I didn't respond to most of them. But I think you need to see them. I opened the envelope and pulled out the pages. There were about 20 emails, printed in order. I skimmed the first few. They were what I expected. You overreacted. He was already leaving. You miss me and you know it. But one email stood out. Subject line, tell him or I will. I read it twice before looking up. You never told me he threatened me. She looked sick. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to manipulate you. I didn't want to make myself the victim. What did he mean by this? She swallowed. He was going to show you pictures. Ones I didn't even know he took. Of us. Together. To hurt you. Or control me. I don't know. I exhaled. My hands were shaking. He didn't send them, I said. No, she whispered. But he still has them. I clenched my jaw. That son of a bitch had recorded things. Without consent. He had used her, and she'd let him. That's the part that made my blood boil, not out of love, but out of principle. Not because she was my wife, but because she was a person. A person who, in all her mistakes, still deserved not to be violated. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I didn't answer. That night, I made one call. Not to Natalie. Not to Ryan. But to my lawyer. Is blackmail still blackmail if he hasn't sent anything yet? Yes, he said. If there's threat of harm or coercion, it's illegal. Good, I said. Let's make sure he knows that. There are moments in a man's life when he has to decide what kind of legacy he wants to leave behind. For me, it came down to this. Was I going to let the man who helped dismantle my marriage keep even a shred of power over me? Or was I going to take it back? Ryan had always been the slick one. The charmer. He was the guy who could talk his way out of anything: traffic tickets, bar fights, women's hearts. When we were kids, I remember watching him skate through trouble while the rest of us dealt with the consequences. I think deep down, I always knew he'd implode eventually. I just never thought I'd be the wreckage. My lawyer drafted a cease and desist letter immediately. It cited Natalie's evidence, the threatening email, the implication of revenge photos, the emotional manipulation. He made it clear, if Ryan ever so much as hinted at exposing anything, or contacting either of us again, we would pursue criminal charges and a civil suit. We didn't send it right away. First, I made a call of my own. I needed him to hear me. He answered on the second ring. "Caleb," he said, voice cautious. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "You shouldn't have," I said. There was a pause. "So what's this about?" "You know exactly what it's about," I said. "The photos. The threats. The emails you sent Natalie." Another beat of silence. Then, "Man, don't tell me you're believing her. She didn't have to show me. She could have let it go. But she didn't. That says something." He scoffed. "Please. She's just trying to." "No. Stop," I snapped. "You don't get to play this off like you're the victim. You slept with my wife. You knew what you were doing. And now you're trying to twist the knife." "I didn't threaten anything," he said defensively. "I just said she should be honest. You said, and I quote, 'Tell him or I will.' That's a threat." I could almost hear him blinking on the other end. "I've got a lawyer," I continued. "And you're about to get a very official piece of paper warning you what'll happen if you send, share, or even talk about those photos again. You want to test me? Go ahead. But I'll drag your ass through court and make sure every judge and clerk knows exactly who you are." "You're bluffing." "I'm not," I said. "You're not special anymore, Ryan. You're a middle-aged mess with a wrecked reputation and a self-esteem problem. And if you push me, you'll be a public one, too." I hung up before he could answer. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about boundaries. It was about ending this, really ending it. The next day, the cease and desist went out by certified mail and email. My lawyer confirmed receipt. Ryan never responded. Not legally. Not personally. He faded into silence. Exactly where he belonged. When I told Lila about all of it, I expected discomfort. Awkward questions. Doubt. But she just nodded slowly, processing. "Do you feel better?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "It's like sweeping up glass. I'm not bleeding anymore, but I still feel every crack." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You did the right thing. For yourself. For closure." I looked into her eyes, soft, steady, understanding. "You're not intimidated by any of this?" "No," she said, tilting her head. "You're not broken, Caleb. You're just healing. And healing's messy. I respect messy." That made me smile. I didn't even try to hide it. Things with Lila didn't change after that. They deepened. We didn't rush. We didn't label anything. But we saw each other more. She met my brother and his wife at a quiet dinner where no one talked about Natalie or Ryan. Just wine, laughter, and a grilled salmon that Lila insisted on finishing for everyone at the table. "You've got a good one," my brother told me later. "She sees you. Not the aftermath." That stuck with me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I finally moved the Mustang into the garage of the new house I'd bought. A small place. 2 bedrooms. White brick. Quiet street. It had a front porch I stained myself and a back deck that caught the last of the sunset. Lila helped me unpack the last few boxes. She laughed at my collection of sci-fi novels. Rolled her eyes at my refusal to get rid of an old college hoodie. We stood on the back deck that night with beers in hand and silence between us. Not uncomfortable. Just content. You ever think, she said, about how it all started? With Natalie? With everything. I nodded. All the time. And what do you think now? I sipped my drink. Watched the stars flicker to life overhead. I think, I said slowly, that I thought love meant never letting go. But sometimes, it's the letting go that saves you. She smiled at that. Deep. I have my moments. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. I'm glad you let go, she said softly. Because I like what you're building now. I looked down at her. So do I. And for the first time since everything shattered, I didn't feel like I was standing in the ruins anymore. I felt like I was home. It's been 5 years since I saw him. Caleb. I still remember the last time. Not the moment in the park with the envelope, though that's the official end. I mean the last real time. The one that lives in my bones. It was a Tuesday morning. He was brushing his teeth, wearing that faded blue t-shirt I always stole when I felt sick. The bathroom mirror was fogged up. I stood in the doorway, watching him through the blur, thinking, God, how did I get so lucky? That version of me didn't know she was weeks away from destroying everything. I didn't know the moment was a goodbye. People talk about betrayal like it's a storm, fast, violent, out of nowhere. But for me, it was slow. A rot. A quiet erosion. One unspoken disappointment at a time. One unshared grief after another. The infertility broke something in me. I know that sounds like a cliché. But it did. And I didn't tell him. Not really. I kept smiling. Kept cooking dinner. Kept making plans I wasn't excited about. I let him believe I was okay, and when I couldn't pretend anymore, I found someone who let me forget I wasn't. That's not an excuse. Just the truth. Ryan was a fantasy. Nothing more. A walking illusion that made me feel wanted, for a time. He was chaos disguised as comfort. And I chose him over the man who held my hand through every appointment, who slept on hospital chairs, who whispered, "We'll try again," even when he was breaking too. I chose wrong. And when I realized it, when I saw Caleb standing in that doorway holding my phone, shaking with betrayal, I knew I'd done something irreversible. Something I could never take back. I remember the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. The kind of look you only get to see once, because after that, the part of them that loved you without conditions is gone. I rebuilt, in a way. I moved cities. Went back to school. Got a counseling degree, ironic, I know. But somewhere between the therapy sessions and late-night crying fits, I realized I didn't want to just understand my mistakes. I wanted to help people survive theirs. I work with women now. Women like me. Women who got lost somewhere between their 20s and their first big heartbreak. Women who stayed too long. Women who cheated. Women who are trying to become something better than their worst moment. I don't tell them my story. That's not the point. But I carry it with me. Every time someone says, "He'll never forgive me," I think of Caleb's silence. Every time someone says, "I don't deserve a second chance," I remember how I stood on that porch and watched him walk past me like I was a stranger. Sometimes I dream about him. Not the man I betrayed. The one I met in college. The one who danced with me under string lights, barefoot and half-drunk, laughing like the world had never been cruel. In those dreams, he forgives me. Not because I deserve it. But because I want it. I've tried dating. Once or twice. Nothing serious. Every man I've met since him has felt like filler. Like I'm flipping through channels, but the show I want isn't airing anymore. Sometimes I think maybe I'm meant to be alone. Not as punishment, but as a kind of penance. I had the best man I'll ever know, and I lost him. And the worst part? He was never mine to begin with. Not really. He was his, whole, honest, and brave. And I broke that man. Not with one decision, but with hundreds of small ones. Now he belongs to someone else. I saw a picture of them once, Caleb and the woman with the laugh like firelight. Lila. I didn't look her up, but a friend mentioned she'd seen them at a music festival. He looked good, she said. Really good. Happy. I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Not because I wanted him back. But because I finally believed he was gone. Really gone. I still have the photo. The one I took of him asleep on the couch with the book resting on his chest. He never looked more peaceful than in that moment. Like the world couldn't touch him. I keep it in a box now. Tucked behind tax forms and old greeting cards. I haven't looked at it in months. But I can still see it when I close my eyes. They say you don't survive infidelity. That even if you rebuild, you carry the wreckage with you. I think they're right. But sometimes, if you're lucky, the person you destroyed walks away and finds something better. And all you can do, is be thankful they did.